My boss looked me straight in the eyes, his voice as cold as the polished glass desk that separated us. Jessica, your position is no longer necessary. Clear your desk by noon. His words echoed through the room, the sterile finality of them sucking the air right from my lungs. Amber stood quietly behind him, leaning casually against the door frame, her perfectly manicured fingers wrapped delicately around a coffee mug that I'd personally chosen for Mark 2 Christmases ago. Her smile was subtle, barely noticeable, but unmistakably triumphant. My name is Jessica Bennett. At 41, I'd spent 15 long and dedicated years climbing the ranks in New York City's fiercely competitive nonprofit sector. The Heartreach Foundation wasn't just a job, it was my life, my passion, and I'd nurtured it from a fledgling operation into one of Manhattan's most respected charities. I'd given up countless nights, weekends, holidays, even relationships, to see this organization succeed, believing every hour spent was worth the cause we supported. But none of that mattered now. I glanced at Amber, whose gaze slid arrogantly across my face before dropping to her phone, already bored with the drama she'd helped create. Mark Hollister, my boss and CEO of the Heartreach Foundation, refused to meet my eyes any longer. He shifted in his seat, adjusting his custom-tailored suit, visibly uncomfortable yet stubbornly dismissive. Can you at least give me a reason? My voice was calm, betraying none of the internal turmoil ripping through me. Mark sighed impatiently, tapping his pen against a stack of documents. We're restructuring, Jessica. It's a strategic decision. Don't take it personally. The irony almost made me laugh. Don't take it personally? How else was I supposed to take it after discovering, piece by humiliating piece, that my role would soon belong to the woman quietly smirking by the doorway, the same young secretary whose professional credentials began and ended with her scandalously short tenure as Mark's assistant? I stood slowly, maintaining dignity despite the shameful spectacle he'd created. Understood, I replied, my voice quiet yet firm. Mark flinched slightly, perhaps surprised at my composed reaction. As I turned to leave, Amber deliberately blocked the doorway for an extra beat, forcing me to hesitate, making sure I absorbed every bit of her victory. Good luck, Jessica, she whispered mockingly, stepping aside at last. Her laughter followed me softly down the hall, the sharp sting of betrayal trailing close behind. Returning to my office, soon to be hers, I calmly packed 15 years of effort into a single cardboard box. My fingers trembled slightly as I reached for a framed photo of the charity's first successful fundraising gala, remembering vividly the countless nights I'd spent crafting its success. The box felt heavier with each carefully placed memory, a bitter reminder of loyalty misplaced. Outside my window, Manhattan stretched endlessly, busy, indifferent, unaware of my quiet devastation. As I walked out into the bustling street, the midday sun glinting off skyscraper windows, a single thought resonated clearly in my mind: Mark Hollister had underestimated me. He'd assumed my silence was weakness, my professionalism vulnerability. But he didn't know who I knew or how deeply my connections ran. And soon enough, he would learn the price of that ignorance. I was born and raised in Rochester, upstate New York, the eldest of 3 daughters in a house where being composed and responsible wasn't a virtue, it was expected. My parents were both public school teachers. We weren't wealthy, but our house was always full of books, calendars, order, and this quiet, unshakable faith in hard work. I carried that same sense of duty into everything I did. By the time I moved to New York City in my mid-20s, I wasn't chasing glamour or status like some of my peers. I just wanted to make a difference. While others were climbing corporate ladders, I started at the bottom of the nonprofit world, stuffing envelopes, managing donor spreadsheets, staying late to write grant proposals nobody else wanted to touch. I wasn't the flashiest in the room, but I got results. I joined Heartreach Foundation when it was just a 3-room office above a dry cleaner in Chelsea. Back then, it was barely surviving. But I saw the potential. The idea of combining direct medical aid with community advocacy was ahead of its time. And I believed in it, maybe more than I believed in myself. I helped recruit donors, built operations from scratch, created programs from the ground up, and eventually became the organization's chief development officer. Mark Hollister joined 4 years after me. He came in with smooth charm, a strong jawline, and an MBA from Wharton that he never let anyone forget. The board had been dazzled by his connections, his vision, his promises to modernize the brand. I wasn't naive, I knew his type. But at the time, he didn't feel like a threat. If anything, we worked well together in the beginning. I handled the substance, and he handled the optics. But the deeper Mark embedded himself, the more the culture shifted. Board meetings became about branding, not outcomes. Gala budgets ballooned while field program budgets were trimmed. He began surrounding himself with people who admired his suits more than his strategies. He'd push me out of media interviews, even when it was my team's work being showcased. Still, I stayed focused, telling myself, the mission comes first. Then came Amber Clark. She started as an executive assistant, a new hire who brought Mark his coffee and laughed too loudly at his jokes. I didn't think much of her until I began seeing the shifts. Mark's attention during meetings started lingering a little too long. Amber began sitting in on donor dinners she had no business attending. My proposals started coming back with edits in her voice, phrases like impact-forward branding and donor emotional narrative, words I knew she'd picked up secondhand and didn't fully understand. When I voiced my concerns about the direction we were taking, especially the financial excess being funneled into events over outreach, I was labeled traditional, resistant to innovation. I'd been called worse, and I wasn't there to impress. But when I pointed out a few questionable vendor choices on the expense reports, including a media consultant Amber had previously worked with, Mark shut it down fast. "We're evolving, Jess. Try to keep up." I should have seen it coming. The chilly silences. The way Amber's role kept expanding without any official title change. The shift in Mark's tone whenever I questioned anything. But I didn't think he'd fire me. Not like that. Not with zero notice, no conversation, no exit plan. Just a cold, corporate execution designed to humiliate me. 15 years gone, erased in one breath. That night, I sat on the floor of my apartment, lights off, the skyline flickering outside my window. I hadn't called anyone. I didn't want sympathy. I wanted clarity. What had I really lost? A job? Or the illusion that integrity would always be enough? In the quiet, I stared at the bookshelf across the room, lined with awards I never displayed, programs I'd launched, donor letters thanking me for transforming their lives, and framed photos of the very children Heartreach was supposed to serve. They hadn't fired me because I failed. They fired me because I made it too difficult to manipulate the system. Because I asked too many questions. Because I refused to be dazzled. And that's when it clicked. Mark hadn't removed a liability. He'd provoked a witness. And in the world we operated in, I had one thing he underestimated completely: access. The following week, I didn't wallow. I didn't rant on social media or call old coworkers to gossip. I did what I'd always done best: observe, document, and think strategically. I started by going over my old emails and financial reports. I had backups of almost everything: donor rosters, budget breakdowns, vendor contracts. I wasn't looking to take the organization down. That wasn't the point. But I needed to understand what Mark and Amber had been planning behind the scenes, and more importantly, why they'd needed me gone. I found a few things almost immediately. There was a catering vendor that had billed $42,000 for a single event, triple the average budget I'd approved for similar fundraisers. I recognized the vendor's name from Amber's Instagram. She'd tagged them in a post from a private rooftop dinner 3 weeks prior. Then there was a branding consultant who received a $15,000 retainer but had no website, no registered LLC, and whose listed contact number went straight to voicemail. I recognized his name too. He'd once been photographed arm in arm with Mark at a gala. And then there were the travel reimbursements, flights to Miami and Aspen labeled as donor development. I remembered those trips. Mark had told the board he was meeting with potential philanthropists. But the photos I'd seen, casual beach shots, hotel suite views, selfies, painted a different story. No donors. Just Amber. It was sloppy. Brazen, even. They weren't hiding it because they didn't think they had to. They'd assumed no one would look. And once I was out, they were probably right. Except I wasn't out, not really. Because while Mark had the title and the corner office, I had something else entirely: history. Relationships. A reputation. And leverage. For years, I'd volunteered with several overlapping charities in the city. I'd sat on advisory boards, served as a guest speaker at events, and mentored younger women entering the nonprofit space. One of those boards, New York Children's Hope Fund, was particularly dear to me. We'd collaborated on health equity programs, and I'd worked closely with their president, Lisa Reynolds, for over a decade. We weren't just colleagues, we were friends. And as it happened, Children's Hope was also Mark's latest obsession. He'd been courting their board relentlessly for months, trying to land a partnership that would elevate Heartreach's status and potentially earn him a seat on the National Philanthropy Council. It was the kind of association that got you invited to exclusive retreats, international summits, front-page profiles in Philanthropy Today. He needed them. I texted Lisa that afternoon. Lunch this week? Just us. Got something I need to share. She replied within minutes. Tomorrow. Noon. My office. And Jess, whatever it is, I've got your back. I exhaled slowly. The wheels were beginning to turn. But something else happened that night. Something small, but telling. Amber messaged me. Not a call. Not a formal email. Just a private message on LinkedIn: hope you're doing okay. Wasn't personal. Things move fast around here. Wish you the best. I stared at it for a full minute. The audacity. The condescension wrapped in faux concern. She didn't care if I was okay. She just wanted to make sure I stayed quiet. I didn't reply. Instead, I looked over her profile. She'd already updated her title: Director of Strategic Advancement, Heartreach Foundation. I almost laughed out loud. Strategic advancement? She barely understood how donor engagement metrics worked. And now she was running the department I had built with my own two hands. I closed my laptop and sat in silence. They wanted fast and flashy. But I'd built slow and solid. They might have won the moment. But they had no idea what was coming next. Lisa's office overlooked Bryant Park, a glass-fronted corner suite nestled within a midtown nonprofit hub. I arrived 5 minutes early, as always, and was greeted by her assistant with a warm smile and a fresh cup of chamomile tea. Lisa knew I didn't drink coffee when I was stressed. She stepped out of her meeting promptly at noon, heels clicking sharply on the hardwood floor. Jess, she said, arms open, voice low but sincere. You look good for someone I heard just got backstabbed. I smirked faintly. Let's just say I've had worse mornings. We moved into her office and closed the door behind us. No preamble. No small talk. Lisa sat across from me and folded her hands on her desk. Tell me everything. Don't hold back. And I didn't. I laid it all out: the sudden termination, Amber's mysterious promotion, the financial inconsistencies I'd quietly tracked in my final weeks, the shady vendors, the unexplained travel. I showed her screenshots, spreadsheets, expense records I had printed and annotated with highlighter like I was preparing for a courtroom trial. Lisa's expression didn't change much, but her jaw tensed gradually as the evidence piled up. They're stealing from the donors, I said, flatly. Maybe not in cash, but in credibility. In intention. And if this continues, it's going to backfire on every organization that ever trusted Heartreach. Lisa leaned back in her chair and blew out a slow breath. Mark pitched us again last week, she said. Wants to co-host the spring gala. Offered to absorb the entire event budget as a gesture of partnership. Even promised to bring in a 6-figure donor. Let me guess, I said. That donor lives in Aspen and only flies private? She nodded. That, or she's on Mark's arm. For a moment, we sat in silence, the weight of it all hanging in the room like storm clouds before rain. Then Lisa narrowed her eyes. "So what's your play, Jess? You didn't come here to vent." "I know you." I met her gaze directly. "I want to speak at the gala." She blinked. "Excuse me?" "I want 5 minutes. On stage. No slides, no notes. Just me, thanking Heartreach for their years of partnership." Lisa frowned slightly. "And then?" "And then," I said, slowly, "I tell the truth." I watched her consider it, the risk, the fallout, the optics. Lisa wasn't just a leader, she was a tactician. She knew how to choose battles and when to hold the line. After a long pause, she nodded once. "You get 5 minutes. But Jess, this has to be clean. You can't sound bitter. You can't make it personal." "It's not personal," I replied. "It's professional. And if I do this right, it'll be undeniable." She looked at me for a long time, then stood and extended her hand. "Then let's make it count." That night, I dusted off the black notebook I kept tucked in the back of my closet, the one I used only when something really mattered. I sketched an outline of my speech, not a takedown, not a tantrum, but a revelation. A mirror held up to Mark's image, reflecting the choices he thought no one would notice. The manipulated budgets. The misuse of trust. The arrogance of thinking good PR could cover bad leadership. But more than that, I wanted to speak for everyone who'd ever been erased, overlooked, replaced. I wanted silence to have a voice. And 5 minutes would be enough. Over the next 2 weeks, I kept to the shadows. I called in quiet favors, former vendors, donors, even a retired board member who'd always said I was the only reason he stayed involved. Everyone had a story. Everyone had noticed the shift. Nobody had wanted to speak up first. But I would be first. And I wouldn't have to shout. The truth has a strange weight to it. When delivered right, it lands with the force of gravity. The Heartreach Spring Gala was always a spectacle. Held at the Grand Pavilion on the Upper East Side, it was a night of sequins and spotlights, of billionaires in black tie and foundation directors angling for influence. The guest list rivaled that of a political fundraiser, and Mark loved every second of it. This year, he had even more reason to gloat. He'd finally secured a co-hosting partnership with Children's Hope, the very jewel he'd been chasing for years. Amber stood near the entrance greeting guests as they entered. She wore a sapphire blue gown that looked custom-tailored, her arm hooked confidently around Mark's. Cameras flashed. Laughter floated like perfume through the lobby. To anyone watching, they were the perfect philanthropic power couple, young, polished, unstoppable. But inside, the stage had already been set. Lisa and I had rehearsed everything to the minute. The event would follow its usual flow: dinner, awards, and then a short moment of gratitude from a longtime member of the Heartreach family, as Lisa put it in the program. My name was listed quietly, barely a footnote. Just the way I wanted it. As the evening unfolded, I watched from a quiet table near the back of the ballroom. I saw Mark working the room with the same slick charm I remembered. Amber smiled, tossed her hair, whispered strategically into the ears of board members she barely knew. They didn't know I was there. Not yet. When the time came, Lisa took the stage, thanked the sponsors, and gave a warm nod toward the Heartreach team. Then she gestured to me. "I'd like to invite someone who's been a force in this city's nonprofit space for over 15 years. Someone who helped build bridges between organizations long before partnerships were fashionable. Please welcome, Jessica Bennett." A quiet murmur swept through the room. Amber's head snapped toward the stage. I caught Mark's jaw tighten ever so slightly as he whispered something to her. I walked calmly to the podium, no notes in hand, just the weight of every betrayal I'd carried in silence. I began softly. "Good evening. I didn't come here tonight as an executive. Or even as a guest of honor. I came here as a witness." The room stilled. Wine glasses paused in midair. For over a decade, I served Heartreach Foundation. I built programs, secured funding, and sat at the table with some of you here tonight. It was never glamorous work, but it mattered. Because trust matters. Transparency matters. And in this city, where reputations are sometimes louder than results, those things are too easily forgotten. I let the silence stretch, not rushing. Then I continued. Over the past year, decisions were made, internally, quietly, that prioritized image over impact. Money meant for outreach was funneled into optics. Funds were spent on luxury branding, inflated vendor deals, and trips that served no one but the people taking them. Now I saw it, eyes widening, murmurs starting at the side tables. A few guests looked at Mark, who shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Amber stared at me, her expression frozen somewhere between disbelief and panic. I didn't mention their names. I didn't need to. The facts spoke for themselves. I raised my chin slightly. And when I questioned those decisions, I wasn't corrected. I was erased. Removed. Not with a conversation, but with a closed door and a cardboard box. Gasps now. Real ones. But here's the thing about trust, I said, steady. It doesn't belong to executives. It belongs to the donors. To the communities we claim to serve. And tonight, I wanted you to know the truth, because you deserve to choose where your generosity goes, and whom it uplifts. I took a breath and smiled, not cruelly, just honestly. For those still committed to the real work, to integrity, to impact, I'll see you out there. The mission is too important to be left in the hands of people chasing headlines. I stepped back. Applause didn't come immediately. There was just silence. Then whispers. Then a slow, building clap from the back of the room, Lisa. She stood, clapping. Others followed. Confused, hesitant. But it grew. And Mark could do nothing to stop it. I walked off stage without looking back. Behind me, the applause turned into a wave. Amber had gone pale. Mark stood rigid, lips pressed into a line as Lisa moved toward the mic again. And just like that, the empire he built on spin and seduction began to crack, in front of everyone who once believed in it. I didn't stay for dessert. By the time the ballroom lights dimmed for the final toast, I was already outside, standing beneath a pale street lamp on Fifth Avenue, the spring air cool against my skin. My hands were steady. My breath even. Not triumphant, just still. Like a door had finally closed with a sound so soft it was almost sacred. Back inside, the fallout had already begun. Lisa texted me an hour later, board called an emergency session. Mark didn't stay. Amber left in tears. I think they finally saw it. I didn't reply right away. Instead, I walked 2 blocks to a late-night diner I used to frequent in my early nonprofit days. The place hadn't changed, still served watery coffee and grilled cheese with too much butter. I slid into a booth by the window and ordered both. For once, I ate slowly. By morning, the press had caught wind. Not from me, but someone had filmed my speech, and it had begun making the rounds through LinkedIn and nonprofit watchdog blogs. The headline on one article read, "When Integrity Speaks, Former Exec Blows Whistle on Heartreach Gala Stage." Calls started pouring in by 9 a.m. A donor I hadn't spoken to in years left a voicemail. I had no idea. "You should have been running that place, Jessica. Not that clown." By noon, a journalist from the Chronicle of Philanthropy requested an interview. That evening, the Heartreach Foundation released a public statement. "We take financial integrity seriously. In light of recent concerns, Mr. Hollister has voluntarily stepped down as CEO, effective immediately. An external audit is being commissioned. We remain committed to transparency and rebuilding trust." Voluntarily. Of course. But the real damage had been done, not by me, but by Mark himself. See, people don't fall because someone pushes them. They fall when there's nothing left holding them up. And when your entire reputation is built on charisma and cover stories, the moment someone pulls back the curtain, it collapses on its own weight. Amber, for her part, vanished from the public-facing team within 48 hours. Quietly let go. No announcement. Just a silent removal from the website and the organizational chart. 2 weeks later, I received a letter from Heartreach's board of directors. It was formal, carefully worded, but underneath the pleasantries, the message was clear. We were wrong. Thank you for your service. Your integrity helped illuminate what we failed to see. Enclosed was an offer, consultant position, temporary but strategic, tasked with helping re-establish donor trust and restructure internal compliance protocols. I stared at it for a long time. The offer was generous. Sincere. But I folded it quietly and slid it into a drawer. I hadn't done this to be invited back. I'd done it so no one else would have to stand where I stood, fired, disrespected, discarded, for doing the right thing. A month later, I joined another organization. A smaller one. Scrappier, more grounded. The kind of place where meetings happen around folding tables, and budgets are watched like heartbeats. And for the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. People still whispered about what I'd done. Some called it brave. Some called it reckless. But I wasn't chasing their approval anymore. I'd said what needed to be said, not for applause, not for revenge, but to let the silence know it no longer had the final word. And when the next Gala season came, I received a new invitation. Not from Heartreach. From Children's Hope. Keynote speaker, Jessica Bennett, on courage, truth, and quiet power. The night of the Children's Hope keynote, I stood behind the curtain, watching the ballroom fill with faces I hadn't seen in months, some familiar, some new. There was no dread in my chest this time. No panic. Just a calm, steady awareness that I was exactly where I needed to be. When Lisa introduced me, she didn't use grand titles or polished sound bites. She simply said, Jessica Bennett has spent her career choosing substance over spotlight. And sometimes, that choice is exactly what changes everything. I stepped onto the stage to warm applause, not thunderous, but real. Genuine. I looked out over the audience and saw not just donors or executives or dignitaries, but people. Human beings who had likely, at some point, been forced to choose between what was easy and what was right. And so I spoke to that. I used to think the hardest part of working in nonprofits was the long hours, the budget constraints, the constant need to justify impact. But it's not. The hardest part is when you discover the mission you've poured your life into is being used by someone who never believed in it at all. I paused, let the truth sink in. Most people think betrayal looks like shouting. Slammed doors. Burned bridges. But the real betrayal? I looked slowly across the room. It's when someone uses your silence as a stepping stone. When they think your restraint means you'll never speak. I could feel the tension shift, like a shared recognition in the room. Then I offered them something else. Something more than critique. But I also learned this, you don't need to shout to be heard. You don't need to humiliate to hold people accountable. You just have to stay rooted in truth. Long enough for the ground beneath them to crumble. Soft murmurs of agreement rippled from table to table. I wasn't a hero, I continued. I was just tired of being quiet in a room where lies were being sold as leadership. So I told the truth. And when the truth is undeniable, it does the work for you. When I stepped off that stage, the applause wasn't just for a speech. It was for every woman in that room who'd once been silenced. For every employee who'd been replaced by someone prettier, younger, more obedient. For every person who'd ever walked away wondering if integrity had a place in ambition. In the weeks that followed, I received hundreds of messages, emails, cards, quiet thank yous in hallways, from people who said, "You gave me the courage to say something too." That was never my goal. But it was the greatest reward. Mark? He never resurfaced in the nonprofit world. Last I heard, he was consulting somewhere in Miami, pitching digital transformation strategies to startup founders half his age. Amber's social media went silent. Her title disappeared. Her spotlight dimmed. The empire they built on illusion simply dissolved, quietly, thoroughly. And me? I stopped measuring success by the size of the gala or the prestige of the partner. I began choosing work where impact wasn't just measured, it was felt. Where boardrooms looked like the communities we served. Where my voice wasn't just tolerated, it was trusted. Sometimes I still think about that moment, the click of the door behind me the day Mark fired me. How heavy that cardboard box felt. How small I felt walking out of a building I had once helped build. But now I realize, I wasn't walking away from something. I was walking toward it. Because silence is only powerful until the wrong person decides to stand up. And sometimes, the greatest revenge isn't destruction. It's clarity. It's respect. It's walking back into the room, unbroken. And being the one they now ask to speak first. And that's how I learned that sometimes, power doesn't come from position, it comes from knowing who you are when they take the title away. Would you have stayed quiet? Or spoken up like I did? Tell me what you would have done. If this story moved you, leave a comment, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and never forget, integrity is its own kind of victory. And that's how I learned that silence isn't weakness, it's strategy. You don't always need to raise your voice to be heard. Sometimes, truth delivered calmly is what echoes the loudest. What would you have done if you were me? Would you have walked away, or taken the stage? Leave a comment. Share this with someone who knows what it's like to be overlooked. And don't forget to follow for more real stories of smart, quiet revenge.